this concept of digital gatekeepers is a key thread that runs through the future that we are walking into. Of course, talking about the future, everyone that I speak to wants to know about NFTs or non-fungible tokens and things like micropayments and what's going on with the more creative side of the crypto economy right now. And there are a few interesting things to get into, far beyond the ridiculous prices that digital graphics have been selling for in crypto markets. So from everything from memes selling for $500,000, for example, based on that NFT basis that allows you to essentially own a copyright on a digital asset. That's just really the start of it. What we're starting to see is that the decentralized internet, that whole crypto playground that we're building around blockchain and Bitcoin type technologies, is allowing us to monetize all sorts of things that we weren't able to easily monetize before. And in particular, it allows us also to monetize micropayments. So in other words, you could be paid fractions of a dollar or fractions of a rand for watching an advert, for example. Instead of having to pay to remove that advert, you could be paid to watch it in real time. These systems and the sort of smart contracts that run with them do allow us to monetize all sorts of things, including our own time. So if we can sort of throw our minds forward a little bit, we can envisage a world where everything we do is either a debit or a credit. And if capitalism is something that makes you feel a bit uncomfortable in its current guise, the new crypto version of capitalism is going to monetize all things that are currently free right now. So it's going to plug all those gaps into a marketplace, and it's already starting to happen. If you want to see the emergence of things like Substack that allow you to pay journalists per view or per article instead of paying a subscription, say, to a newspaper, or accessing that article for free online, that's the same sort of thinking that's leading us to this world of micropayments. And from an employment perspective, we're also starting to see new payment models that are quite interesting. So at the moment, most of us, if we are employed, we get paid a salary at the end of every month. So you get paid once every 30 days in a lump sum. These sort of micropayment abilities allow us to get paid on a drip feed type basis. So if you can imagine getting paid per second, that as you work throughout the day, your bank balance goes up as long as you are actually working. So instead of getting a salary at the end of the month, you get paid a few rands or whatever your cost to company is per second. So you've got a flow of money rather than sort of a stock of money that you get at the end of every month. And this concept of continual flows of cash and currency are really going to start disrupting the way that we consider our value as human beings and how we value our time, how we value our data, how we are paid, how we transact. There are very deep implications that run through from this whole concept of monetizing absolutely everyone, everywhere, at all times. And one of the ways we can sort of extend that idea is into the concept of what I'm terming the autonomous economy. And here, when we start to roll out those concepts like smart contracts and like things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, we're getting to a point where us as individuals and as businesses are outsourcing more and more of our decisions, our purchasing decisions and our personal decisions to machines. So we're sort of deferring to the authority of the all-seeing, all-knowing, omnipotent internet gods, if you want to put it that way. And there's some very sort of simple examples that can illustrate this point in terms of sort of autonomous decision making. On a more sort of flippant basis, we can see how increasingly us human beings are relying on machine algorithms to determine who we should date and mate with. So if you're using apps like Tinder or Grindr or whatever you're into, you're relying on that algorithm to filter through the people and to bring you potential matches. So that's one way. Instead of choosing our own partners, we're allowing a machine to sort of validate or veto our natural inclinations as to who we want to spend time with. Other examples would be how essentially services like Amazon, for example, or even booksellers that have large amounts of data on your purchase behavior are not just recommending products they think you might like based on past purchases. They're now sort of automatically filling baskets and saying, do you want to reorder this? And if that happens, that's a great way to sort of understand how we can start to, instead of choosing brands off a shelf on the computer, we now allow that company, we allow that product, that service, that platform to make that choice for us. So instead of choosing particular products, we just accepting that order, or we just putting things onto auto renew, which is even more interesting because it means essentially if you are a brand or a business, if you want to connect with the consumer, you have to override that automated decision-making process, which can become quite difficult to do. So the other way we can look at this is in terms of the autonomous B2B economy. Now, the autonomous B2B economy is what happens when we start to outsource our supply chain decisions to, once again, a machine. For example, there's a company in Hong Kong known as Knowledge Ventures, and what they have done is they have essentially assigned their mergers and acquisition decision choices to a machine, to an algorithm that decides what businesses they should be buying and what businesses they should be selling. And this, of course, is very, very interesting because it means that if you are a company that is involved in the autonomous economy, it means that you're essentially becoming commoditized. Any automatic transaction can be replicated by your competitors. In order to maintain your profit margins and your value within your supply chain, you have to be adding something that cannot be automated away in the autonomous economy. You want to be holding on to as many as possible of those very human decisions if you are wanting to make sure that your company and your business and your own role within your organization is not potentially going to be automated away. Very similar to that, what we've also started to see is that in terms of the internet and the way it's heading, we're moving away from sort of the internet of data and bits and bytes towards the internet of things and people. So we're starting to connect our bodies using biometric sensors and data. And you can see on the screen there next to me, there is a man in Israel who got one of the first freedom bracelets. Now, the freedom bracelets were set up as a reaction to the COVID pandemic that essentially is as a tracking device that says whether that person's been vaccinated or not and where they are in a sort of geographic sense. But this is just sort of the start. We're going to be tracking more and more of our physical bodies and using that tracking and that data for more and more access or limitations to access of more and more goods and services that we use. And a great example here to just show you how edge computing can really go from the sublime to the ridiculous very, very quickly, as we can see the rise and the advent of what they're terming smart toilets, for example. So every time you use your toilet, that toilet can take your data, sense it, and say whether there is a potential health threat that you have. Of course, we can roll this up a little bit forward to see that, of course, your medical insurers, your national health insurance companies would be, once again, very, very interested in this sort of data because it aligns with your physical risk. So on the one hand, we are able to price products more personally going forward. On the other hand, it does mean that we're going to be giving up more and more of our data in order to get access to goods and services. And this, of course, can sort of border into the world of surveillance, which might be for some people a slightly less sort of nice way to start talking about these sorts of things, but it is something we have to bear in mind. Every sort of thing we get, on the one hand, does have a cost. On the other hand, that we do have to be aware of going forward. I do think my screen is frozen over there. If you give me a second, I can try and restart that, because that looks a bit strange.
It has flipped over now to the next slide on our side.
Okay, great. So it's flipping over there. Can you still see me talking?
I can't see your video. I mean, I see your video, but it's not moving, but the content is coming up on the screen. So we've got
okay, perfect.
VR goggles on.
That's all good. We can do that. All right, let's continue on. So in terms of the next sort of thing we get to there is in this very, very digitized, very, very connected world where our bodies are connected, our screens are connected, everything else is connected. we can also get a bit overwhelmed with our digital lives. And what we've definitely seen over the course of the last year is how spending more and more time in screen-based environments like we are right now can lead to stress and fatigue and physical burnout. It can also lead to things like skin hunger, which is a very, very interesting concept in our very lonely, very digitally connected, but very physically disconnected world. And digital burnout can lead to skin hunger. And skin hunger, as I said, is what happens when our immune systems start to wear down because we're not having enough physical contact with physical human beings. In very virtual, very technological worlds, we still have to remember that we are, as human beings, we are, in fact, warm-blooded, bodied creatures. And the image you can see on the screen there with the cows wearing their VR goggles is quite extraordinary. It comes from a company in Russia that has tested using these VR goggles to see if by showing cows that live in perhaps not very nice conditions, visions of beautiful green fields can in fact increase those cows' milk yields. So it really does show that we can perhaps push things a little bit too far when we start to embrace all the amazing things we have available to us in the world of technology. So from digital burnout, we also have a sort of an equal and opposite parallel trend that we're seeing, and that's the trend of digital escapism and what that means for the future of you and I. And when we talk about digital escapism, we talk about those very, very seductive virtual environments that I showed you earlier, and how more and more it becomes more attractive to sort of invest your treasure, your time, your attention in a digital version of you that has the perfect life that you can entirely engineer to be the way that you want it to be. So of course, if you don't like the way your body looks right now, or if you can't afford the sort of clothes you want to wear in the real world, you can build that perfect life in your virtual space. And the temptation then becomes to spend more and more time in that virtual space. And the more time you do, it perpetuates sort of vicious and virtuous cycles, in that the less time you sort of spend investing in your real world relationships or in your real world body. It's a very sort of matrixy concept. And for many young people across the world, including the growing group of what we're calling hikikomori, which is a Japanese term for young people, particularly young men, lonely young men, who essentially become digital recluses. They spend all their time in their digital worlds, and to the point that if society does not look after them and bring them food to eat, these people literally would not eat at all. So that's the sort of risk when it starts to talk about our virtual worlds, as marvelous as they are, as wonderful as those cross-border opportunities are for connecting with each other and creating new business models and new ways of working together. There are risks if we forget about the fact that we are in fact human beings, and we do require some sort of a human touch if we want to have a really prosperous, flourishing future. And then when we start tying all these trends together, including virtual platforms, the social media platforms we have right now, that sharing economy, the pay-as-you-go economy, the crypto economy, all those things that I've spoken about, to sort of get a handle on what this future looks like when we pull all these threads together, as we start to see sort of the emergence of what we're terming walled gardens around our lives, where people that can afford to pay for all these goods and services and can pay all those various different subscriptions essentially get to live within inside the walls of that garden. And within the walls of that garden, you get things like security and safety and access to goods and services. But at the same time, you've got to give up a bit of your privacy. And of course, you have to pay for those privileges. Of course, that begs the question as to what happens on the other side of the wall with the people who are not necessarily able to afford all those goods and services. And that's something that should ring true to us, particularly in South Africa, where we have the world's most unequal society. And we can already see that we have walled gardens on a physical level all around us right now. And that those of us who are fortunate enough do live within security complexes, and those that don't obviously live in very, very different living conditions, we should try and understand that same metaphor as rolling out in the walled gardens emerging on the internet. And we're starting to see this happening more and more. Even platforms like Twitter are in the process of launching paid versions. So people that are rich enough to afford it will be able to access a higher quality of information and more elite members of society within the pay-gate version of that corner of the internet. Whereas everyone else who can't afford it will have a very different experience of connecting to the internet. The free internet as we know it, with so many of the services we use, including search and social media and all of those things, and even email, is moving away at the moment towards a more pay-as-you-go world, enabled by those micro payments that I spoke to you about earlier. So we do have to think about the way that the world is separated on the physical level is absolutely happening right now on the digital level. And that, of course, means that some people are not going to feel particularly comfortable about this very capitalistic digital society, especially those of us who have grown up with the benefits of having a lot of free things in the digital world. And that's why we're starting to see pushback against technology from a regulatory perspective and also from a social perspective. Those Netflix documentaries on the Great Hack and the social dilemma did go quite a long way towards shifting the conversation around the pure merits of the digital economy and the power of the very, very big tech platforms, or effectively those walled digital gardens that have so much control over who we can say, what we can say to, when and how. That's the one side that we're starting to see pushback against the world of technology. The other side is, of course, when it comes to the world of work and how many people are frightened of robots taking their jobs. Again, you can see on the screen next to me over there a robot dolphin. So not even zoo animals or animals at the aquarium are safe from having their jobs replaced by robots. So yes, that's a little bit flippant, but the point is that we are able to start automating so many more things that is making people nervous about their future and their place in the world of work. Now, my sort of message to people that are concerned about technology and robotics and automation limiting their access to be able to participate in the economy, we have to shift our thinking away from the world of jobs, which can, yes, because jobs are tasks, be automated piecemeal at a time, and towards thinking more about work and the overall value that we are adding to society. There's always going to be room for us to add value, and we have to just be able to distinguish that. When we look at our own roles in our own organizations or our own industries, in the greatest supply chains, we have to really just think, where am I adding value? That piece of your value addition journey is probably quite safe. And where are you costing money to someone else? So where are you putting up a toll gate? Where are the things that you are doing being seen as a grudge purchase by your employer or by the people that work with you or by your customers? And where are they seeing you as being someone or something or some business that adds value to their experience? If we start to separate that, we start to see that most of us are going to have job security in the future, although maybe not in the form of a job as we know it today. Of course, the other thing to consider in this very virtualized, sort of disconnected world that I've explained, this very digitized lives that we are building, we're also moving into that post-truth era, which so many people have spoken about, where everyone's reality is subjective and when you never know who it is that you're actually speaking to. For a great example here, there are companies that will allow you to build a digital avatar of yourself to send to meetings like this one or this call we are on today. So you'd essentially be able to be in two places at once. You could send your digital avatar to nod along and listen to your boss while you yourself are busy playing a computer game in a different room of your house. And that is a world where trust has been, or trust in individuals is being replaced by trust in machines, and that could potentially have some quite destabilizing effects for our society, as we've seen due to the influence of things like bot armies and troll armies that have influenced things like elections and votes and various high prominent election cycles across the world. So something to bear in mind. But that would be a far too depressing place to leave this conversation today. So what I want to do for this last part is to rather talk you through how you can make sense of this and some very practical tips you can take into your organization, into your own life, into your teams, if you want to see the digitized future as being something exciting you can participate in rather than something scary that is threatening your place in the world. The first thing to realize is that you do have to accommodate and to adapt to the technological and social trends going on around us. But you do have a choice between digitization and digital transformation. That's the simplest way that I can describe this choice. Digitization is essentially doing exactly what you were doing before, but allowing technology to do it more efficiently or more effectively. So instead of just having a physical shop, for example, if you're someone who sells shoes, now you will sell shoes through an e-store. Digital transformation, however, is using technology to change and enhance your business model. So again, to use a very silly example of being a shoe seller, it would be now selling digital shoes for players in Minecraft, for example. So it's around seeing how technology can extend your business into new markets, into new opportunities, and not just do the same thing you were doing anyway, but to actually change and shift that to take full advantage of all the marvelous tools and platforms that we have available to us. Now, a few things hold us back from seeing those transformation opportunities. The first one is the time preference mismatch we have in our public sector and within our businesses themselves. What we tend to find is that our leaders tend to have the shortest time horizon because they tend to be the oldest people, the closest to retirement or the closest to the end of their election cycles. Whereas younger people within organizations and within societies that have a longer time preference have less power over decisions. And older people with shorter time horizons tend to make more conservative choices and to be more interested in digitization than into full transformation. We know this. I mean, when you get older, you tend to get more conservative, whereas younger people tend to be more progressive, but have less ability to actually drive those transformational changes. The other challenge we have when it comes to spotting transformation opportunities is, as I like to term it, the sort of Moneyball manager's curse. And this is the fact that within organizations in particular, middle managers and people who are paid salaries to make decisions on behalf of a board or behalf of shareholders or behalf of citizens, for example, if you want to look at public servants, very similar problem here. They're incentivized not to make mistakes rather than being incentivized to try new things. You can get into a lot more trouble as a manager for trying something new no one has done before and failing than you would if you had just done what everyone else had done, even if what everyone else in your industry was doing was not necessarily the best course forward. And this is often a problem with incentives. And what it can lead to, both of those sort of conservative streaks coming from shorter time preferences and also from managers who are incentivized to make safe choices rather than swing big hits, is that we can sometimes end up with automated inefficiencies. So sometimes when we layer technology on and we digitize the things that we have running in our organizations, we can end up making the mistakes that we were making anyway, just more efficient and more fast. So you have to be very, very careful that we not automating things that are creating problems for us as we go forward into the future. And I'm sure you can all think of examples there, but one of my favorite examples with regards to automated mistakes would be what happened to a gentleman by the name of Mr. Diallo. He was a computer programmer in America, and he arrived at work one day and he had been fired, but by an algorithm. No human being had done it. His access card was denied, his email address was shut down, and no human was able to override the process. Someone had just typed in a wrong line or ticked the wrong box, and the poor guy ended up having to go through a whole HR nightmare because we had automated the wrong things. Essentially, when it comes to automation and digitization, we want to be automating away cost centers and pain points. We don't want to be automating away centers of value or human connection. So there we're starting to look at our HR functions, our sales and marketing functions. Think very carefully about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to trying to use technology to make our lives more efficient. Don't make mistakes more efficient. That's not very productive to any of us. And when it comes to automated efficiency and inefficiency, it's closely related to the Cobra Effect. And the Cobra Effect is basically a behavioral economics term that was coined based on what happened with the British Empire in India. When India was a colony of the British Empire, the British put out an incentive saying that they would pay the locals a particular fee for every dead cobra they brought to them, because cobras were very dangerous to people and causing a lot of trouble in the settlements at that time. And for a while, they managed to reduce the number of cobras by implementing that incentive. But over time, the locals realized if they bred cobras, they could bring more cobras to the British in exchange for more money. So they actually ended up creating more cobras than what they had before. So think very, very carefully about the sort of incentives we are putting in place when we start to embrace new technology and try to make new choices. And the message really here is, when it comes to progress and digital transformation and transforming our businesses to take advantage of the new world, we have to be careful of two things. Firstly, we have to be careful of not being too conservative, like I mentioned just now, but we also have to be careful that our progress is actually going to reform or really progress and not to deform what we had before. And that's why it's always important to ask questions before we throw away an old process or add a new process in. And I've got a lovely story that illustrates just how important it is to always ask why. Jim O'Shaughnessy, he's a very well-known investor and he's a good friend of mine. And he loves to tell this story of how when he was growing up, he always saw his mother at Thanksgiving cut the end off the ham before she put it into the oven. And she did this for every year. Every single year, the same ritual took place. That end of ham was always thrown in the bin. And one day he asked her why she was doing that. And she said she doesn't actually know. She said because her mother used to do that. So they got his grandmother on the phone, and the grandmother said the reason she cut the end off the ham was because her pan wasn't big enough for it. So by not asking the question why, we can end up essentially automating inefficiencies or automating bad choices. Always ask why we want to embrace a new technology or take advantage of a new platform, rather than just using it because it's the newest, shiniest, latest gadget that everyone else is into right now. And blockchain's a great example there. Not everyone needs a blockchain, but almost every consulting company will want to sell you one right now because it's a buzzword. But ask why. Why do we need this? And why is it going to be the best fit for what we want to achieve for our own business? And then, of course, none of this makes sense without thinking about humans again. So I'm going to come back to that. That human touch, our human relationships are our core source of value going forward. The margin is where the humans are. The margins are not where the automatable, digitizational parts of our business are right now. And there's very good reasons for that. When it comes to margin and creating value going forward, it has to come from new ideas, and new ideas come from people. They don't come from machines or from tools or for technology. They come from people like you and I having conversations. And that's why in very digitized worlds like we find ourselves right now, we're finding so many of our relationships have become so very linear. The roles and the responsibilities are so clearly defined. There's very little space for serendipity or accidental meeting of each other on a staircase or in an elevator. When we're only communicating with each other through our screens at our scheduled call times and our scheduled platforms, we're missing out on a lot of serendipitous opportunities to connect new ideas and to connect with new people. And there's a great example here of what happened with a bunch of economists who did a paper looking at the effects of prohibition on innovation. So now I'm not going to tell you that alcohol makes for good ideas, not at all. I'm not advocating that you drink any particular beverage, but rather when you look at the analysis that these economists did, they saw that new patent regulations or new patent registrations, in other words, a good proxy for invention within a particular community, were negatively correlated with the periods of prohibition in America. And the reason that they found that innovation fell off during prohibition was not because people weren't drinking as much as they used to, but rather because people used to meet in those third spaces, in those saloons, in those bars. And that's where new relationships were formed, new ideas came about, and it catalyzed this whole concept of innovation. That's why it's so important for teams working in a virtual environment to continue connecting and making the effort to connect not just with your direct reports, your colleagues in your particular silo, but actually with everyone across your organization and with strangers too. We have to schedule that time. We have to put the effort into creating new networks and new nodes if we want to be able to spot opportunities and let new ideas flow. And that's really the point. Any network, any organization, any team is only as strong as the number of connections or nodes that network has. The more nodes are connected, the more resilient that network is. And it's a very similar thinking to what's going on with the decentralized internet and decentralized autonomous organizations. They're based on networks and on deep networks, not just sort of top-down, quite fragile networks that concentrate power in small places, and if one node falls out, the whole sort of thing falls down. You want to think of trying to build a net and letting people that might not necessarily have the same background as you, work in the same department as you, or people that you see on a day-to-day basis, always address the same problems. You want to try get problems and opportunities across as many hands, as many eyes as possible. And a great example that goes to show how that outside perspective, that out of the ordinary way of thinking and approaching a problem can solve problems, comes that you can see on the screen next to me again over here. You can see this is what happened at a children's hospital during COVID. They brought in a Formula One pit crew to try and help them to speed up the way they were addressing patients in the ward, and they were able to significantly cut down the time it took to care for each of those patients without compromising on care. So it just goes to show how taking an outside perspective and seeing things by stepping back a little bit can help us to address all the challenges the future has for us, and also to help us spot the opportunities. And that's really the point. We want to change our perspective, much like the image on the screen over here. It depends on what you focus on, whether you focus on the lights or whether you focus on the shade. And it's up to us to change our perspective, to focus on the opportunities, and to make sure at the same time that we are preparing against the threats that the new emerging technologies and the new emerging ways of working and connecting with each other are going to start to disrupt our own roles, our own industries, and our own organizations going forward. But always don't forget, it's all about the people at the end of the day. So definitely only connect, just like that quote at the end over here says. That's probably the key takeaway that I can give you today.
Bronwyn, that was absolutely amazing and interesting. I found it very challenging at some times, and there's a couple of comments I got and a couple of questions I've got for you as well. But let's just talk about some things I've observed. The consumption model you touched on in the beginning of the discussion, it's the reality today already. We've seen it happening a lot, and it's happening a lot more, not only in soft assets like software purchases, but it's also moving towards hardware purchases as well. The likes of trends in the US, which is becoming more prevalent in South Africa today, the purchase of a car versus the leasing of a car. We don't want to own the asset, you should be able to use the asset. And that's a big shift that's happening in the industry. The digital real estate environment, that one is fascinating for me. And I keep asking myself the question, why? I don't have an answer to it, and maybe I need to dig a little deeper. Maybe I'm a little bit conservative, but I wouldn't know if I want to invest in a virtual landscape, and I guess there's an opportunity if somebody's going to buy that virtual landscape and develop it, and there's an economy being driven from it. Now that creates a different opportunity, but maybe that's a little bit more in the future in terms of thinking. Virtual garments, a fascinating concept, and I can see that working. Already we've seen people playing with their backdrops, backgrounds, being able to say, I'm on the beach, I'm in the office, I'm in a spacecraft, whatever the case might be, and by using that with green screen, we can change our dress style. So that makes a lot of sense, actually. Imagine people going to the awards or Oscars or something, and it's all virtual today, being able to dress up in a Gucci garment, which they've rented, as opposed to having purchased. So it certainly makes sense there. The bookshelves analogy is quite an interesting one as well, because we've seen the rise of Amazon that came from Barnes & Noble, which basically was a bookseller, right? It was stores and then became digital. They started collecting data became information, and they were able to continuously upsell that market into the world's largest digital platform for online purchases today. Fascinating story, obviously. The smart toilet is scary. I must just be honest with you. It bothers me. Yeah, anyway, I guess there's a few jokes that can come out of that one, so we leave that one where it is. The VR goggles on the cows, that is some serious concerns for me. because I can just see the amount of manipulation that's going to happen in the world in terms of livestock, etc., and the sensitivities around that. Even people, virtual vacations maybe, and I mean, I don't know how real that is. Your statement of digitization, virtual versus the digital transformation, I think was quite interesting. And I think for me, the big takeaway from that part of the conversations were, ask yourself the question, why? Why are we doing it the way we're doing it today, and why are we not doing it differently? And I think that is what will lead to some change or some different ways of thinking in both our business and our lives, I guess, because the case of the ham is quite clear. The lady was cutting off a piece because that was the tradition, if I can put it that way. But in all essence, it was just because it didn't fit the pan. Now, if the question of why didn't come out, and maybe the mother, not the grandmother, but the mother got into the habit of it because she saw her mother doing it, but the younger generation are higher risk takers, right? And they were able to ask that question because they're looking at it from an outside perspective. So yeah, fascinating. So we've got a couple of I've got a few questions for you, but I've also got a question on a panel here, another panel from a gentleman called Joe. Joe, I know very well. Hello, Joe. I hope you're well. Joe is asking, is there a difference between virtual coins, like Bitcoin, for example, and virtual land, buildings, or real estates?
Yeah, there is a difference, although the principles are interconnecting quite a lot at the moment. So what we saw those two trends growing at the same time. The roots of the digital real estate actually come back all the way down to the days of The Sims, which I don't know if you remember. I remember playing that when I was a kid. Very similar concept. Even then, they were in-game purchases. So this whole concept of in-game purchases is not a new concept, but it has been enabled by the advent of cryptocurrencies that essentially allow those virtual environments to run their own currencies, much like a country can run has its own fiat currency. Now, as the owner of a digital platform, like a Minecraft or like a Fortnite, you can have your own digital currency that runs on blockchain-based principles. Now, what Bitcoin did and what all the other sort of cryptocurrency tokens have done since then is it enabled us to have immutable digital currency. And that was always the challenge before. And that's also why NFTs have taken off so strongly right now, is they've enabled us to have digital scarcity. It's a way to make sure that digital coin is not spent more than once. I mean, it's quite easy with like a paper note of money. If I give you 100 Rand, I no longer have it. That's how it works in the physical world. In the digital world, there was always a risk that two people could own that sort of digital token at the same time. And that was the problem that essentially the Bitcoin solution solved. And since then, there have been many copycats that have built on the idea, changed it a bit. And all the digital ownership that we're seeing right now, the big explosion in that trend that's taken place over the last sort of, I want to say probably 8 months, is off the back of that same sort of thinking around that same principle around digital scarcity that allows us to have a single owner and a proof of ownership chain over our digital goods. And because you're able to prove you own it, it automatically creates more value, and it becomes a tradable asset, like you were saying before. Nobody wants to buy a digital plot if two people can claim ownership to it at the same time. But as long as there's a marketplace, we're able to keep selling and buying these things. Much like all of our economies, they have value because we agree they have value, right? So as long as there's someone that's willing to buy it for a higher price than you bought it for, there's a market for it. That's the market case. It's not necessarily based on fundamentals, but it's based on absolute truths about how humans work.
That's a good explanation. Thank you. And I mean, obviously the non-fungible or the non-fungible tokens is quite key, which is based on blockchain, which is giving you that digital ownership in the same way you'd have an original portrait or painting and know it's an original. That gives that traceability or ownership. So that's a good view. Thank you, Joe. That's a good question. We've got another question from Yaku. Hi, Yaku. Thank you for joining us. Yaku's question was, how do you see a concept of the circular economy fitting into the future, and how do balance and sustainability and progress fit into that, I guess?
Yes, that's a very interesting thing. I left it out of today's talk largely because I was focusing more on technology and less on sort of like the sort of environmental trends. But sustainability is one of the key underlying trends, as in sustainability from a social perspective too. So inequality and environmental degradation are framing almost all of our policy choices and our business choices at the moment. Now, the interesting thing with the emergence of digital economies, which I spent most of today talking about, is that they offer probably the only way for us to achieve sustainability and growth without having to pick one or the other. If we are able to build virtual economies and virtual businesses and trade and sell virtual garments rather than disposable throwaway fashion, it is a way for us to offer both hope and sustainability to future generations, which is key. Because unfortunately, the pure sustainability message based on our current real-world economies is not a particularly cheerful one. It requires future generations to make sacrifices in their living standards because previous generations, our generation and the older generations, have overshot their endowments. And that's really the challenge with sustainability at the moment. But I am hopeful that if we are able to find ways to trade value, we can address both the inequality challenge, because virtual markets are globalized markets, they're borderless markets. And that means that young Africans or young people in the south of Asia and developing economies have more opportunities to get involved with these as some of the people across any sort of developed economy. So they're very democratizing in that regard. And they also are not as destructive to our physical planet. They're not free from a carbon footprint, but they definitely require less of a destruction than buying a new pair of jeans every 2 weeks would do, for example.
Cool, thank you. So I've got a question, and we'll get back to the audience, and it goes back to the cryptos, right? So Mike, the question is there a future for decentralized finance, or is all cryptos essentially a Ponzi scheme?
There's definitely a future for it, but there's not just one future. There's two futures that are emerging. The one would be the national controlled or highly centralized crypto futures, and the other one would be the highly decentralized sort of crypto anarchist libertarian sort of cryptocurrencies that we understand today. Bitcoin itself is obviously the easiest example on this to look at in terms of the sort of libertarian private borderless money. Bitcoin's not going to go anywhere. It has a larger market cap than many countries, certainly not very soon. That's not to say that it's a great store of value. In fact, definitely don't go into that without your eyes very wide open to the fact that you can lose a lot of money that you put in. But we have to understand the original concept of Bitcoin was not actually as a store of value, it was as a means of exchange. If the original white paper was around peer-to-peer electronic cash, it's a way to transact without your government or your tax agents seeing what's going on. It's a way to have control over how you flow your money without going through central banks, without going through exchange controls. So it's hugely disruptive, and that technology cannot really be destroyed even by regulators because the network is so decentralized across the world, because the miners are so distributed, and because there's so many people already in that network. The ability to move cash around the world peer-to-peer is pretty much set up. And I can point you in directions if you're interested in looking at it, but there's a man called, if you look at the, I'm trying to think what's, there's a charity based in the US that looks at this. I think they call the Freedom Foundation. I could be wrong, but I'll have a look. I can send you links after this. They have really explained the sort of the utility of that and how difficult it is to break that sort of decentralized network. On the other hand, we've also seen arising out of that same way of thinking around digital scarcity or lack thereof, the emergence of central bank digital currencies, which are the opposite of decentralized. They are 100% centralized. Like any technology has like an underside and a top side. Central bank digital currencies are entirely, they basically ubiquitous surveillance money. So if your government issues a digital currency using a blockchain-based system, that government no longer even has to rely on a central bank to control money supply. So the implications there are vast. If you're interested in what's happening there, have a look at what China's doing. They're one of the first countries to have started experimenting with these digital currencies. So digital currency is not like making an EFT payment. It's not that at all. It allows for an entire sort of one chain to sort of understand how all the transactions in your economy are flowing. It's an entirely post-cash type of economic model, but it does change the sort of ability for governments to see what's going on and how they control money supply in quite dramatic ways. There's a future for both of those things, the highly decentralized private money and the highly centralized government money based on the same underlying technology.
Cool, man. So the whole peer-to-peer money exchange obviously leaves a lot of loopholes, as man is very innovative. We find loopholes all the time. We see it in our kids, and as adults we see it less, but it's certainly been manipulated. I think the ability for money laundering is one of the concerns globally, and certainly the hackers have monopolized that to their benefit in terms of ransomware, etc., because of non-traceability and confidentiality. They're able to move millions of dollars around, and nobody knows. And I guess that everything comes with a challenge and needs work. So we've got another question. It's from Charles. Hi, Charles. Thanks for joining us today. So Charles' question is, hi, Bronwyn. At the beginning, you said companies not owning hardware and are moving to the cloud is not good for resilience. Why?
It's not necessarily bad for resilience, but there's a business risk that happens there. So as soon as you are renting access to whatever platform you're using, which is essentially what happens with the cloud or software-based or software as a service-based service. So if your accounting service is on a pay-as-you-go basis, you're renting space on that server on that cloud, that company that you are renting that service from, anything as a service is essentially a rental arrangement, has basically the ability to change their terms and conditions in ways that might not be beneficial to your business. So it means they could change the pricing structure, and because you've got so much data and so much history with them, it's quite difficult to move, say, to a competitor. The other thing to realize with the software as a service and cloud type companies is that they do tend to favor economies of scale. So they tend to be very few of them. They're sort of almost natural monopolies. So they are kind of anti-competitive from that side. And that means whenever you are using one of those on a B2B basis, that software company that you are renting from has a degree of power over your business. You might feel comfortable with that. You might think that the efficiencies and the cost savings are worth the potential risk of that company not acting in your best interest in the future. You might decide otherwise. That's the sort of superficial challenge there. The deeper business risk here, unfortunately, is what happens with sort of coordinated corporate denial of service attacks, which you started to see. This is a new term. It's only just being coined. And we're talking here about what happens at a sort of deep stack software as a service or system as a service level. So we can use an example here of what happened with the sort of very right-wing alternative to Twitter in America. There was a company called Parler that popped up. Some of you might have heard that story, but they were a business. And what happened was they were a victim of a corporate denial of service attack, in that ISP providers and very big app stores refused to host their service. Those app stores and those ISP service providers are essentially as a service businesses, and they refuse to allow that company to actually connect with its own market. Now, of course, Parler was very naughty, and you might think you're not particularly naughty, but the same principle can apply. If all the ISP providers in South Africa, and there are not many of them, decide they're no longer going to support, say, businesses involved in the fossil fuel industry, you're not able to connect to the internet suddenly if you are a Shell or a BP. This is something that's not a hypothetical threat, by the way. The PR organization in the United States, or the United Kingdom, sorry, that they organized all together to say none of them would work for fossil fuel companies, for example. So it does become a risk when you rely on a third-party sort of oligarchy or monopolistic type of service provider. It does provide a potential business risk. That's not to say it's not a good idea. Always weigh up the costs and benefits, but just understand that efficiency resilience equation does tend to be a bit of a trade-off.
Yeah, that's true. And then to extend it a little bit further, there's also the legislative part where different countries have different laws around ownership and access to data. And organizations may not want governments or other entities to have access to that, not necessarily because they operate underhandedly, but the intellectual property is what's critical to them. And your data might well be protected in your country, but when you deal with a hyperscaler, which is your large cloud providers, your data could be moving anywhere in the world, if not real time, into a DR situation, for example. You might think it sits in South Africa, but it's being replicated into another country from an availability perspective. And that introduced the risk of access to your data or your information, and ownership of your data. And that's another bridge to cross. So thank you for that question, Charles. We have another bit of feedback here from Ilsa. Hi, Ilsa. Nice to see you on our webinar again. So Ilsa said, very interesting question. Thank you. A question on networking. Okay. How do we get people out from behind their virtual screens to network with peers or others and not miss out on innovation? Comes back to that alcohol story I had earlier. Without physical networking, without people. Okay. It's like having to wash your hands, but at the same time, saving water.
Yeah, exactly. That is the challenge with connecting with our teams in remote environments. So we've seen some interesting ideas. I don't know how effective they are because nothing connecting with people in a physical environment. We are 3D bodies. We're not just sort of disembodied heads, as much as we try and work that way because we've had to deal with the limitations that we have. For those reasons, we don't think that the world of work is going to be entirely remote going forward. There is a value to both remote work, again, in terms of efficiency, but in terms of building resilience, nothing really beats getting together with actual physical people in a physical space. And hopefully we can get back to that as soon as possible. But in the meantime, we have seen things like sort of roulette-based chats. So you get all the people in your organization together into a particular sort of roulette and sort of assign them random Teams or Zoom rooms. So they have to force to connect with people that they wouldn't normally connect with through their normal team lines, through their Discord or through their Slack channel, whatever the case might be. So deliberately shaking that up. We can look at doing things like that. Other things haven't worked so well, like sort of forced socialization on like a corporate sing-along on a Friday night tends to annoy people because it's too artificial. Rather, we just have to sort of build in space, and we have to be quite cognizant of not entrenching lines of communication. So if there is a particular team member in your team that doesn't participate much in a say, a Teams-based call, you've got to call on that person and make sure they have the room to speak, and you have to actually sort of force those communications to take place. It's not an easy thing to address at all, but create room for sort of serendipity. Other things we have seen that some people swear by, in fact, a lot of my European colleagues seem to think it works very, very well, is they have these sorts of things where you can have a sort of a virtual avatar, once again, of a virtual office space that runs on your desktop screen all day long. So you can kind of see people on the screen and meet at the water cooler, even though it's not a real water cooler. And you also feel like you are not all by yourself working at home. So you can kind of see the little avatars wandering around throughout the day. So other people say it's a little bit sort of surveillance-y because you can tell when people are getting up from their desks, etc. But again, there's trade-offs in every direction, but just be cognizant of trying to keep not just the normal channels of communication open, that you're calling on people you wouldn't normally, that you're connecting with department heads across different parts of your organization, those sorts of things.
I think we've just taken hybrid working to a new height in terms of not only hybrid working, i.e. sometimes in office, sometimes at home, but bringing the virtual world into the avatar mention of my home work environments that I still am connected to my colleagues and friends at work as well. So a question that's close to my heart perhaps is education, and a lot of the people in the audience as well. So I've got a question for is there a role for AI in education, and why would that be and how would it be? Any thoughts on that?
There is a role for AI in education, but again, you should never be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's almost like an inverse pyramid. Like the younger children are, the more human touch and the more tactile they need their education to be. You can't really sort of Zoom preschool. I mean, I had a preschooler when we went into COVID. It's not really possible. You know, they don't really pay attention. They're not designed to sort of sit still with earphones on and look at a screen. However, AI in higher education, at high school level education, allows for amazing opportunities in self-directed learning journeys. And much like I spoke earlier about the commercialization of everything, we can also sort of have a hyper-credentialization of everything. So instead of just earning a degree, you have to go sit and learn for 4 years. You can go on a personal learning journey, collect microcredits to end up with enough credits to have a degree, but going on your own way rather than submitting like a thesis at the end of 4 years. And those sort of micro-credentialization and those personalized AI adaptive learning journeys are really quite interesting, but particularly for sort of older children going into higher education and lifelong learning, that sort of becomes a lot more exciting because the AI platforms are able to adapt to your areas of strengths and weakness to help, you know, make sure that you're getting the sort of the optimal learning if you're learning a particular skill. Of course, that does refer more to skills and to sort of knowledge-based subjects and less towards more sort of exploratory type subjects where just basic sort of reading and lecturing might still develop better results.
So it's a pretty much hybrid, I think. And I like what you're saying there because we're starting to talk about an accelerated education process combined with skills, because you can get workplace experience through AI with scenario playing, etc., which gives you the real feeling of having been there without having to be there, which can accelerate your learning experience. I think that's the key to it, making it real and not just textbook. I think that's what we're talking about here. So that's quite fascinating. We've got 4 minutes left. I want to ask the audience if there's any other questions on their side. Please post, so that we can answer those. There must be something that you have in mind that you want to ask Bronwyn. perhaps while we give it a minute for somebody to respond there, I've got another question here. How important is it for a futurist to distinguish between signals and predictions?
It's essential. So like what you start off with is the trend. The trend will give you what is going on in the world. And a trend is based on past performance up until today. And that requires data points. Some of those might be quantitative, some might be qualitative, but that is a signal. A signal is trying to connect those trends to give you a picture of what could happen in the future. But the trend is only your base case probable future scenario coming up. If you are going to work as a futurist, your job is not so much to predict what is definitely going to happen, but rather to explore what could happen in the full cone of possibility that fans out. If you want to understand the cone of possibility, if you look at the temperature and how we can like sort of predict our weather, we can't really do that. We can't predict more than sort of 5-10 days in the future, because a small variance today compounds into a big variance within 10 days time. Yeah. So our job is to try and extrapolate that full cone of what could happen, both the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, and then hopefully take courses of action to direct us away from what is most probable towards what is more preferable for your organization, for yourself as a person, for your country, bearing in mind, of course, that what's preferable for us or for me or for you might not be the same as what's preferable for the next guy, but we all have a right to sort of vote on our own preferred future, and that's really our role, sort of scope that full realm and to help you make choices to make things better for you in the future.
So no crystal ball on your desk?
No, I do actually have a crystal ball, but that was given to you by a friend.
Okay, so we've got 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to close the segment. And it's a real world question, quite literally, because we're sitting in COVID, we're sitting in a hybrid environment, and the question is not so much about the AI aspects, but the reality today. Where do you see education in South Africa going with regards to online versus remote, or online and remote versus campus-based learning?
In South Africa, I don't think we're moving fast enough in terms of the potential that remote learning allows us, particularly the high school level. It would make a lot more sense if we could invest almost all of our educational budget at the high school level into remote-based learning, because you're able to have the best teachers connect with many more children than they could in a physical classroom for a much lower cost. To give you an indication there, we're already seeing online private schools in South Africa that offer quality, world-class private school education on an online basis to high schoolers for less than the price of the government schools in the same areas. That should be a huge wake-up call for our education budget. I don't think we're moving faster in that regard, because people have done that work. The syllabuses already exist. The teachers know how to do this. The platforms are there. We just have to switch over. But our biggest challenge in South Africa is not even that. We have to look even further down the chain to small children. If you're not getting early education right, we still have more 12-year-olds that can't write their own names than can. And that is, of course, the biggest challenge of all. If you can't read, you can't take advantage of any of these opportunities. And unfortunately, the moves we're making are not making me hugely optimistic that we are solving those problems. That the probable future there is kind of more of what we've got, with more digitization, not digital transformation of the educational experience. So just slapping coding classes into the public school education system is not going to fundamentally change anything. What will change is if we're able to democratize access to quality education to the mass of population across the country.
I think there's a lot of scope for online learning. I think it's a game changer in many ways, especially for people that are in areas where they may have connectivity but not access to the level of schooling they require. My big worry is on a slightly different level. It's the social dynamic of those learners in terms of being in front of the screen the whole day. And then with the virtual worlds coming into play as well, how does their social skills develop? Because are they now tempted to live in the classrooms are virtual? Is their social world going to be virtual? And where does it leave them from a social skills perspective? In the old days, the parents used to chase their kids out of the house, they could play outside. I mean, now it's saying play on your screen, learn on your screen. So it's interesting. So Bronwyn, I want to thank you very much for not only a very informing presentation, but also a very interesting discussion and insights. I thank you for your time, and I hope the audience appreciated that as well. And thank you again. So I'd like to ask Terry to bring up his video.
Thank you.
All the best. Hi, Terry. Good.
Hi there. Hi there.
Good to see you online again. So for those of you who don't know Terry, and I think some of you have met Terry before and know him quite a while by now, we've been dealing with Terry for many years. Terry is with VMware South Africa. And we're talking today about the transformation of the workforce into this new world that we're living in. So Terry's been in the IT industry for about 25 years. He's actually a lot younger than what we think, but the IT industry has this effect on people. And I want to hand over to Terry to talk us through these challenges and the building blocks, and how do we get there to build this new economy from a modern way of thinking. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Feroz. Bronwyn, that was really, really interesting. And now I feel like having to go on stage after Trevor Noah was on stage is really, it was an amazing talk around that. Let me just share my screen quickly. Just hold a second. Great stuff. Can you see my screen, Feroz?
It is in play mode now. I can see it.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. As Feroz says, a lot of the audience might know me already. I've been with VMware now for a couple of years, 10 years. Prior to that, at one of the financial institutions for quite a long time in various roles. And today, I just want to have a quick chat around, our future-ready, or not our, but the future-ready workspace, or anywhere workspace that we see is really becoming really important to a lot of companies or organizations across the world, and even in South Africa and in Africa as well. Quite necessary, especially around the pandemic we're going through. So let me start off first by just showcasing a quick video, and then we carry on from there.
The workplace used to look something like this, and this, and this. When decisions about culture and technology were mandated from the top down, what more could you expect? Well, that was then. This is now. Employees are driving a new digital transformation, demanding more flexibility, more convenience, more choice. Businesses that follow their lead can support talent wherever they are, offering access to the apps they need and want, anytime, anywhere, on any device. With freedom from red tape, forgotten passwords, and IT headaches, people can spend more time collaborating, transforming, and innovating. This digital workspace empowers new champions of change, not just IT, not just HR, but every employee, and gives them the tools to turn every commute into an aha moment and every meeting into an opportunity for culture change. Companies that don't adapt will lose, because when you put employees first, you put business first.
So as we can see, the shift to remote work is actually affecting many organizations. It's not just specific sectors of our society, but it's across all sectors. And as it's really important to know that employees' input into this work from anywhere is also taken is also being valued. And we've seen that some research has been done by Forrester, is that 61%, as it says, 60% of remote work is no longer a perk. 61% of the people been surveyed. So that's actually not even a perk anymore. It's actually a prerequisite because of things like lockdown, enforced lockdowns, and also just people just being scared of networking and going out and actually living life as it was in the past because of the fear of being infected, for example. But it's not just obviously linked to the pandemic, but it really opened up a lot of eyes for a lot of companies around how they want the employees to work and so forth. But then also 90% of those employees said that, or the employees said that it's on the employer to provide the appropriate digital access and the digital tools for them to be able to work. It's not so much coming from their side, but actually the employer that needs to provide that. And then that 70% of, as you can see on the screen there, 73% of buyers say that integrated workforce solution or integrated solution is actually it's a critical priority. It's not something that needs to be disparate or that you have to jump between various things to get to be able to be productive in your anywhere workspace or anywhere workforce environment. But also things that's not just around remote work anymore. It's people as we see, people will start becoming less remote and maybe go back to the office. I mean, even in South Africa, for VMware, for example, our office opened a couple of weeks ago, and but there's a booking system that you need to go into the office. So there will be people that that prefer to 100% work remotely, or actually is required to work 100% remotely, maybe because of their geological location. But also, get those hybrid guys that potentially want to every now and want to go to the office, to get that social networking and interaction with other people. As you also asked the question, you have to, well, how do you do that type of thing? And a lot of people still require require the need to go to the office or go into the workplace to actually meet up with people, have that interactive experiences. And then, that 100% back at work location. There are certain industries where you cannot work remotely, potentially, things like maybe the retailers, people that serve customers on the floors, and even some companies that require their employees to come back, maybe because of a trust issue, or maybe because of the fact that they just haven't embraced this new work style from anywhere. So these multimodal work styles really define how organizations will go forward. And providing choice, once again, to the employees. Once again, if I bring it back to our scenario in VMware, as we've been given the choice to decide your own sort of fate, in the sense that, do you want to work from home? Do you want to sort of have that hybrid solution or hybrid setup? Or if you want to, you can come work 100% at the office. Obviously, adhering to rules has been applied. So, that is really important to understand, that you have to maybe give that freedom to your employees, and that will also maybe instill some sort of trust for the employee as well, to say, well, my employer is trusting me to work remotely. I should not stuff this up. I should really, do whatever I can to make this work, and because it's got a lot of perks to it as well. It's not just a question of waking up late and doing work whenever you want to do it. But this distributed work environment does come with a lot of challenges. I mean, if you look at most companies or most organizations set up, and that's across the board, from education right through to maybe retail and healthcare and so forth, and finances, financial sector, is the fact that, everything was built around that centralized data center, the headquarters. Yes, people are decentralizing, organizations are decentralizing more into the public clouds, moving their data centers out and embracing this multi-cloud era that we moved in. But still, all these different applications that needs to be accessed, or different services that needs to be accessed, somehow always come back to the centralized cloud, and it causes a lot of challenges around, not just from a networking point of view, but also from a response and latency point of view, and overhead point of view. So, bringing all these different applications together, or access to the different applications or resources, needs to be looked at in the future, to make it a lot more efficient. Instead of everything coming back to the one data center and sort of hairpinning back and forth, maybe things should be start looking at, there should be innovations to start breaking out from different points into those different applications, instead of hairpinning back to one central point. And that is something that that we've seen that a lot of companies ask for, a lot of organizations ask for, and this is the direction that's been moved into from our side at VMware as well. Because if you look at the different teams and different challenges, the fact that how do I ensure that a reliable user experience, as I mentioned earlier, because of that thing that I mentioned around coming back to the centralized data center, but also the seamless access to that productivity apps, because you need to also secure and make sure that your data is protected, and not just the data, but also privacy from the user point of view, or from the end user point of view, or the employee point of view, and then that support to that end user. How do I make sure that I support them as it was in the office? Typically in the past, a user could potentially get up and move or walk a couple of floors up or down, or maybe even on the same floor, to a support engineer to be able to assist them with something that they've been battling with. Because not everyone is 100% computer literate. There are people that are really struggling sometimes with the technology. It's become a lot better over the last couple of years, due to the fact that everyone has been, really exposed to it, but you still do have those employees with those people that battle with it. So that support is also really, really important. And accessing that data from a specific device or various devices, that can also cause a problem, because how does an organization trust the devices that comes into their organization? And also, how do I restrict access and maybe restore secure access if something goes wrong, or you pick up something that's not 100%. So all of these challenges are really, really been presented, and it's real challenges that we have in a lot of organizations, and that need to be addressed. So the top level challenges, if you can sort of sum that up, is that suboptimal experience is really, really not it's not negotiable. It really needs to be an optimized experience that the user receives, or that the end person receives, or the employee receives. And security mustn't be bolted on. It must be sort of a intrinsic look at it, or approach to it. It must be part of that platform or solution that's been provided to the end users. And this is what we also see a lot of organizations require, is that because, especially around the distributed workforce, is the fact that cybersecurity is really, really spun out of control. And so many more things need to be done to be able to ensure that we have that security bedded down. And by bolting on security on the side, instead of having it as part of your solution, intrinsic part of your solution, really can cause a problem as well, because that sometimes doesn't work together that well, or there might be some lack in functionality. But then also, by bringing all this together, operational complexity needs to be looked at as well. You don't want to keep that safe, keep it simple and stupid is really a stance that a lot of organizations want to take. They don't want to make it overcomplicated, because people are so distributed, and even their IT staff are so distributed. The more complex the solution is, the longer it takes to troubleshoot things, the longer it takes to solve issues, and even the longer it takes for new employees to learn things and to adopt new things that comes their way. But also from the back end side, also people if there's any changes in staff on the back end side, that complexity really can cause a lot of problem, as I say, with around training and so forth. So productivity is the key, and if you look across all these different sectors, that's how one should think of or to increase productivity going forward, by tackling these three different top challenges, or these three challenges that we see as top challenges. So if you look at technology challenges that we have, that we've seen also across the board, is things like onboarding. How quickly can you onboard a new user? How quickly can they get up to speed and be productive as possible? But also not just the onboarding side of things, but also keep the top talent in your organization. Make sure that they stay there, and that you don't get that churn of employees that you really value, because they don't have proper tools to do their job, or they don't feel that they are valued employees. But then that says safety component is also really, really important. Fear from getting sick, going to the office, causes a lot of people actually to stay at home, or as soon as they get a little bit of a sniffle, they immediately really, really worried about that, and it's justified because of the fact that we are in a pandemic worldwide. But that availability also is really important. Being able to get to your applications, get to your work, being productive immediately, so that you can actually do whatever you need to do on time, as well as within the parameters that have been set to that. And then that visibility and compliance around how quickly can you get to an issue, how quickly do you know there's an issue, are there any trends that pop up, can you see potentially things coming down the line that's caused by simple things like a patch that's been pushed out, or a certain application that's been pushed to employees that needs to be adopted. That it actually, if you can reduce the time in finding issues around that type of thing, from a productivity point of view, as well as from a troubleshooting point of view, it really will go a long way with regard to that anywhere workspace adoption. And that connectivity as well as security is also really important. Ensuring that you can connect, even if it's via VPN, but not even just via VPN, but also via other methods, getting into secure software as a service applications, because as Bronwyn said, there's a lot of subscription has taken over the world. Every vendor basically is moving towards a subscription model from a software point of view, and it was news to me that hardware is the same thing as well, and that is fantastic news, because now you can determine how long you stick with something, how quickly do you want to change, and it creates a lot of innovation in the organizations out there. So that's where VMware saw all the different challenges, and we saw all the different issues that organizations had. And looking back over the last year or so, really started to see what is required by organizations. And that is why we brought in this multimodal, why we're bringing in things to address this multimodal employee experience, making sure that you'll be able to cater for all the different work styles out there, even if it's fully remotely or fully 100% at the office, because you need to ensure that when a user connects internally or even externally, that this is at the same level of let's say zero trust is applied, in the sense that that user might have connected from externally. They might have bring some malicious stuff back into the office if they now connect internally. Don't always assume that it's when you're internal that user is secure, or that they didn't bring in anything from external. And then that secure the distributed edge, because people are connecting from externally, connecting in from various locations or different work styles, due to different work styles. That zero trust, as I mentioned, it really needs to be looked at from an intelligence point of view, ensuring that you can apply various authentication methods or various blocks or access in various different scenarios, and intelligently making those decisions. But then that automation is also really important. Ensuring that via intelligence and insights that you have from your organization's end user estate or employee estate, that you really you can take things to a next level by ensuring that compliance is really is up to scratch, patch compliance, for example, user risk scores, and performance management around devices being used, or even from users, that really being optimized as possible, and also make sure that if there's an issue, that you can pick it up very quickly and ensure that you can address it and remediate it. So looking at managing the multi-model experience, touch-free is really important, because people are all over the world or all over the different locations. So frictionless experiences is really important, from onboarding right through to providing application access or applications or productivity applications to users, and also that instant support, that you'll be able to, if a technician is not in the office, based in the office, or a support technician is based out, obviously also as part of the distributed workforce, that they would be able to get into that person's workspace with obviously the proper access, and then have them up and running as soon as possible as well. But then also providing a freedom of choice to the different employee ages out there, if I can put it that way. People want to be able to work from different devices that really appeals to them and that they're comfortable working with, instead of having been locked down to a specific device, for example, or a specific work style. That freedom of choice is really becoming important, especially for the younger generation, as they are a lot more innovative, they also sort of it's easier for them to take chances and bring new aha moments into the mix. Really, maybe also helping organizations grow further and make it more successful. And that uncompromised uptime. Always try to be up as possible. Have applications up as much as possible. Access to them. Downtime. Make sure that the downtime for any productivity for a user is minimized. And that's where that multi-cloud environment comes into play as well. If it's private cloud or public cloud, or some of the larger hyperscalers or even partners providing this, ensure that you can jump between those and successfully jump between those, ensuring that you have everything up and running, and maybe not have everything in one basket, to ensure that you have choice at least to go to somewhere else if uptime or SLAs is impacted by bad performance. And how do you manage this multiple? Sorry, apologies, that's the same slide. How do you secure the distributed edge? Is by embracing that zero trust mindset. First, give the least privilege for any person to access our organization's applications or internal resources or data. First ensure that person, they are that they say they is, and also that they get the proper authentication challenges being put to them before they can access these applications or resources, and also the devices that they come from. Ensure that those devices are compliant and not causing problems by transferring malicious software or malicious intent from their device into the organization. And that spills back to that hybrid approach, where people will sometimes work from home and sometimes from the office. As soon as they get to the office, still treat them as they are working remotely. Have that zero trust barrier in place. And that's situational intelligence will really bring that into play as well, because then it will ensure that when a user works from a different location, that gets picked up, and maybe a two-factor authentication might be required. Or if they come into the office and connect from a network that they don't usually connect from, that gets taken into consideration as well. Maybe the user is now connecting from the US, and then 5 or 10 minutes later, you see another connection from that same user. If I put it in brackets, from Europe, that definitely causes a problem, because you don't know how can that user travel so quickly to the next location. So have that situational intelligence in place, and have that context, be context aware of what's happening, and then connected control points from the workload that's been accessed, and network, the devices that people want to use. Align that with the applications they want to use as well. Ensure that if you need to connect from, for example, a mobile device, ensure that the correct applications are presented to the user, and not the applications that cannot be launched from there. And also, if they connect from specific networks or specific locations, as I mentioned earlier, ensure that is taken into consideration. And then automation is really key as well. If you cannot automate in a distributed world, it will really become a lot of problems for you, cause a lot of problems for you, due to the fact that people aren't centralized. You can't quickly run to their desk, or they can't quickly go to a center of excellence, for example, and get everything set up. It really needs to make sure that intelligence is working for you, as it says. With all the insights that you get from managing end users' identities, as well as their devices and the applications that they access, and also where they're working from, you get all that information back, and you have to use intelligence to intelligence to automate a lot of tasks, and automate things that potentially would fall through the cracks if there's human intervention. That really is quite an important point that needs to be taken into consideration for this distributed environment. And then that custom workflows. If a user wants to be able to access various different applications from one application, bring those things into place as well, because that automation brings things, make a user a lot more productive, and ensure that you can have a lot more control over that as well. And that cloud native visibility and management as well, that management from not just from your own data center, but also take that visibility into the multi-cloud environment that we are actually working off these last couple of years, or these last year or two. Companies sometimes now also don't even do any domain joins anymore. They actually work with devices that's not domain joined, maybe contractors coming into the organization, or non-permanent staff. So those devices aren't potentially domain joined. Those users aren't domain users potentially. There could be different identities. So that all needs to be also managed properly, ensuring that you're not locked into a specific on-prem solution, for example, that is sort of cloud native, and that you can move between the various clouds as well out there. So if we look at overall at the Anywhere Workspace benefits that we've seen, and that actually came about from research we've done, is visibility and management. Looking at the stakeholders from a CIO and an IT environment, visibility and management is really important for those stakeholders where security and compliance is more the CISO's responsibility, and really don't worry so much about the visibility side of things, but they want to make sure that things are secure and compliant going forward while users being in this distributed world. But HR is also not left behind, because they also need to be able to collaborate, get new talent, ensure that onboarding experience has been done properly, and that a user feel comfortable when they enter an organization with regard to having access to the applications, having access to detail or data that they require, as well as being productive as soon as possible. And then the employees are obviously the most important person of the organization. That is, the experience needs to be optimized as much as possible, and privacy is really, really important, especially around personal data, personal applications, personal things that they do on their devices, and that that's not really work related. That really needs to be taken into consideration as well. So if you look at it from a bigger picture point of view, the bottom line is to have highly engaged employees, being motivated, being happy to work remotely, being happy to work from anywhere, but also reduce the overhead with regard to what needs to be done for these users by putting a lot of automation in place, by taking control of whatever devices and identity that the user wants to access the corporate data or corporate applications from. And then also making that sure that security that is so important is intrinsic to the whole solution, or to the whole offering, if I can put it that way, or strategy, that is really effective, and it's not a boundary or hindrance for end users out there. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time. If there's any questions for us.
Yeah, Terry, thank you very much. Quite informative talking about that workforce transformation. I think your last slide actually concludes quite nicely in terms of those three highlighted points, the highlighted engagement of employees, reduced overheads, and the broader security and effective security framework. I think those are critical issues for organizations today. I'd like to ask the audience, we've got a minute or two actually, well, now it's one. If there's any questions, feel free to post them in terms of thinking or just general questions for Terry while we're waiting for, okay, there we go, there's something up there, let me bring it up quickly. Okay, somebody just saying thank you for attending. So I just want to mention that we are running a series of workshops at the moment together with Terry. We've had the first one a couple of weeks ago, and we've got 3 more coming up, which talks to the practical side of how do we do workforce transformation, how do we incorporate this into the business, what changes the user experience, for example, as in your employee experience, the EX as they call it. So we've got numerous of these sessions running, and you're welcome to inbox myself or Jolene just to keep you on track of those. And I can't remember what's the date for the next one. There's too many things going on in terms of diary time. But we want to invite you to those, specifically if you are interested in continuing with this conversation, as there is huge value in the practical workshops that we're having, because that's more for discussion and how do I do it as opposed to a webinar. So Terry, you must have been doing a really good job. It doesn't look like anyone is having any questions at this point of time. Jolene just pointed out to me, thank you Jolene, that the next one is on modern management, and it's on the 22nd of July. So that's about three weeks odds from now. So feel free to let us know if you want to attend those. But from my side, I don't have any more questions. The audience doesn't have questions. I want to thank you for your time, Terry. It's been very informative again, and hopefully we're able to continue the conversation with this audience in our workshops as well.
Perfect. So, thank you very much. Thanks for the time. I really appreciate it.
So a big thank you to the audience for joining us today. I know it's time taken out of your diary. I trust that the conversation with Bronwyn and the conversation with Terry was useful to you. And again, you're welcome to reach out to myself or Jolene if there's any questions that come up later or anything else that you need to discuss with us. So thank you for attending, and have an awesome day.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.